Agnes Aggie McIntyre, at 65, was a woman of quiet strength. Her silver hair pulled back in a practical bun, framing a face etched with the gentle wisdom of a life well lived, though not without its share of heartache. She lived in the small, charming town of Willow Creek, nestled in the rolling hills of upstate New York. Her home, a cozy cottage with a wraparound porch and a rose garden that always seemed to be in bloom, was her sanctuary. Aggie's life hadn't always been so peaceful. Growing up in the shadow of Magnolia House, a grand, imposing Victorian mansion where she and her sister, Beatrice, had been raised. Life had been a constant battle for affection and acknowledgement. Her parents, Richard and Eleanor, were good people, Aggie supposed, but their love seemed to flow like a river, generous and powerful toward Beatrice, and a mere trickle for Aggie. Beatrice, beautiful and vivacious, was the sunshine of their lives. Aggie was the quiet moon, always watching, always in the background. "Your sister is so talented, Aggie, just look at her accomplishments," her mother would often say, while Aggie's own achievements, like her scholarship to a good college, were met with only a shrug. Even their birthday cakes were a point of contention. Aggie loathed coconut cake, but Beatrice adored it. Every year, there would be a coconut cake for Beatrice, whether Aggie liked it or not. Her requests for a simple chocolate or vanilla were always met with a patronizing laugh. "Oh, Aggie, you're so peculiar sometimes." Everyone loves coconut, though. As the girls grew older, the disparity became more pronounced. Beatrice, with her ever-changing circle of friends and easy charm, was a social butterfly. Aggie, introverted by nature, found solace in her books and her studies. By the time they reached their teenage years, Beatrice had discovered a new game, using her status with their parents to make Aggie's life miserable. Beatrice, always a charmer to others, would turn on Aggie the moment they were alone, her bright smile becoming a cruel sneer. Aggie's friends, when she had them, were often targeted. "Those girls? Oh, Aggie, they are so loud and vulgar," Beatrice would say, a note of disdain in her voice. Their parents would accept Beatrice's opinion without question, and Aggie's friendships were cut short. Her parents, in their blind adoration, believed every word that fell from Beatrice's lips. It was a cruel cycle, that is, accusation from Beatrice, belief from parents, and punishment for Aggie. It didn't matter if Aggie could provide proof of her innocence or show Beatrice's deception. Beatrice would receive a lighter punishment, while Aggie was still found at fault. The one haven Aggie had was her extended family, many of whom lived nearby. They'd gathered one day for a family barbecue. When she had turned down a cousin's invitation to a town dance, saying, "I am not allowed to go anywhere," she had revealed the truth to them, her voice trembling slightly. "It's because my sister has no friends, so I can't either." It was the first time she had said the injustice out loud, and the shock of her words reverberated through the adults. Later on, her parents would scold her for lying and ground her for a month. But the damage was already done. Her extended family had learned the truth about Beatrice and their parents' favoritism, and it had reached her parents' ears. Beatrice, furious and embarrassed at her social standing being known to the extended family, demanded to be transferred to the private school across town. Her parents, always bending to her whims, complied without question, despite the extra cost. While Beatrice gained friends at the new school, she never stopped tormenting Aggie. It was like a game now, one in which she found cruel amusement. Beatrice's friends would come over and participate in the teasing, while their parents would laugh it off as sisterly antics. Then came the boyfriends. Aggie's first love, a charming young man named Tom, was caught in the crossfire. When they were alone for a moment in her living room, Tom came looking for Aggie after Beatrice had approached him in a revealing outfit, batting her eyelashes and telling him how awful Aggie was. Tom's story was one of confusion and disdain as he tried to explain Beatrice's advances. Of course, Beatrice told her parents a completely different tale. She said that Tom had tried to flirt with her, and naturally, she rejected him. Aggie's parents took Beatrice's words as the truth. "Aggie, how could you get involved with a young man who is so disrespectful?" they asked, banning her from dating him. "Not again. This happened again with a second boyfriend and a third, until Aggie finally gave up on having serious relationships. Instead, she dated so that she could experience the simple joys of high school, like going to dances, hanging out with friends, etc. Her reputation as an available young woman, although not one looking for a serious commitment, was soon spread through the high school. Beatrice, on the other hand, proudly paraded a boyfriend around, constantly comparing him to Aggie, until the young man broke things off with Beatrice. She was suddenly angry with him, and their parents were quick to demonize him. By the time college applications came around, it was clear the unfairness would continue. Beatrice received no scholarship, but her parents promised to pay for her college education. Aggie had always been a good student, and her parents constantly told her they were tired of hearing about her high grades. That's just what you're supposed to do, Aggie. Where is the achievement in that? Aggie's good grades had never been celebrated or valued, which were totally expected. She was told she was lucky her sister bought a scholarship and now there was no money to send her. Besides, Beatrice always had more sense than you do. We can't have you go off to college and make poor choices, they reasoned. Aggie, never one to cause a scene, simply accepted their judgment. But deep down, she knew she wouldn't be denied her education. With unwavering focus, she studied day and night, until she secured a full scholarship to a college not far away. When she announced the news, her parents and sister were confused. Beatrice knew how much their parents would be upset with Aggie's success, and she immediately began working on them. When her parents asked her if she was sure, Aggie just nodded. They knew they could not stop her now. College was her lifeline, her escape. She thrived there, making friends and forging her own path. She kept in touch with her parents, but was always careful to limit visits back home. Meanwhile, Beatrice had dropped out of college and returned home. Aggie was constantly reminded of her sister's employment at their mother's workplace. Her parents were convinced this was something to be proud of, an accomplishment that should be honored. Then, after all these years, Aggie found love with a man named Robert. Robert, with his easy smile and playful spirit, was everything that Aggie wasn't, like bold, outspoken, and unafraid of confrontation. He loved a good story and loved to help people in distress even more. He had a protective nature that appealed to her, and for the first time, Aggie felt truly seen, truly cherished. When Aggie and Robert decided to marry, they chose to have a small ceremony in Willow Creek. As a result, the wedding planning became a challenge. Robert's family was spread across the country, while Aggie's was mostly in town. They found a venue and sent out save-the-dates. As soon as her parents heard of the wedding plans, Aggie knew that she'd have to tell Robert about the family drama. Robert listened to the stories, his jaw clenched tight. What did they do? He would ask, barely able to comprehend the injustice Aggie had endured. He bought a small, high-quality recording device that he could hide, convinced that some drama was waiting for him as soon as he met Aggie's family. He didn't want to believe the stories were true, but he was going to be prepared. When he finally met her parents and sister, they were determined to make the occasion all about Beatrice. Instead of celebrating Aggie, they told Robert, "We'll pay for the wedding on one condition. We want you to accept that Beatrice will walk down the aisle first, in a wedding dress." Robert's mind raced. He was stunned. "This is the joke, right?" he asked, looking from her parents to Beatrice. Aggie's sister was practically bouncing in her seat, like a kid who'd just been promised candy. Robert had been ready to insult her, to reveal how childish and spoiled she was, but instead his mind began turning. He would play along. He would make them believe he was on their side. Robert, his voice carefully neutral, told them he'd need to think about it, and rushed back to Aggie, his mind swirling with the possibilities for revenge. He knew that this was the perfect situation for his kind of retribution, and he and Aggie began to plot. "Aggie, you won't believe what they tried to pull," he had said, shaking his head. "It's even worse than what you told me." Aggie was both shocked and amused. She'd become so used to her family's behavior that she was surprised to see it from an outside perspective. She and Robert spent hours brainstorming. They toyed with ideas ranging from ridiculous to outrageously complicated. Eventually, they settled on a simple plan. They would pretend to agree but put the final decisions in their own hands. They would treat the entire wedding planning process as a game, each detail a chance to outmaneuver her family. They called Robert's level-headed brother to discuss the plan. While he knew that he would not be able to talk them out of revenge, he helped them to create a plan that could not be litigated. Robert went back to her parents, saying that he had talked Aggie into accepting the plan. He said Aggie was worried about rocking the boat. As for her sister's part in walking down the aisle first, Robert suggested that Aggie was extremely controlling and neurotic. He used her parents' past words to convince them that she was worried about their wedding being ruined, so she wouldn't have a tantrum if it was a surprise. They ate it up, hook, line, and sinker. Over the next few months, Aggie and Robert milked her parents for all they were worth. Whenever they had to choose a menu or decor item, they would take the cheapest or second cheapest option. Tell her parents it was what they wanted, and then take Beatrice out to see if she would suggest a more expensive option. Of course she always would, and her parents would insist on paying for it. They made sure all communication was face-to-face or phone calls, especially around the matter of Beatrice walking down the aisle first. It solidified the image that Robert and Aggie were controlling and neurotic, but it was also key. Even the wedding dress was an opportunity. Her mother insisted on Aggie using a dress that Aggie would never pick. Robert, using all the skill he had, convinced them that he could help Aggie to wear what her mother and sister picked. Beatrice would then suggest sabotaging her dress so that Aggie would have to wear the family's selection. It was an elaborate charade. They even hired security for the venue, but Robert kept it all a secret, even from Aggie's parents. Aggie, while a naturally shy and meek woman, found the thought of them painting her as this controlling, horrible person hilarious. Robert had her blessing to do whatever he wanted. The day of the wedding arrived. Aggie was surprisingly calm. She'd spent so many years being mistreated that it felt almost normal. The plan her parents and Beatrice had devised was simple. Beatrice would walk down the aisle first before Aggie came out, thus ensuring all the attention was on her. They made sure that she would arrive just as the ceremony was to start so that Aggie wouldn't see her and try to stop her. While Aggie and her bridesmaids were getting ready, Robert was at the venue to make sure all their ducks were in a row. As the guests began to arrive, they were greeted by a woman with a clipboard, checking names off a list. It was only once her parents sat down in their designated seats that the bodyguard arrived. He stood at the entrance, his expression impassive. The time came for the bridal party to enter. As they walked in, Aggie's father stood as if waiting for her. The music began. Then, Aggie appeared, her gown shimmering in the light. Aggie could see the shocked look on her father's face as he tried to find Beatrice, who he assumed would be walking beside Aggie. He did not know that Aggie and her father were to walk down the aisle together. Then his phone rang. It was Beatrice. He muttered something and left her there. Whispers broke out among the guests. Aggie's friend, who was in on the plan, asked Aggie what had happened, pretending to be shocked. Aggie, putting on a tearful voice, said her father had told her that it wasn't supposed to be her that was walking down the aisle. Aggie was genuinely hurt that she had thought, for a moment, that her parents and sister would actually celebrate her, but she had hoped that maybe, just maybe, she would be wrong. The friend went to investigate. Aggie's husband's father quickly came to her and held her arm. He had known about everything. He was told to get to Aggie when the time was right. Meanwhile, Beatrice had arrived at the venue, dressed in her own wedding dress, only to be confronted by security. He refused her entrance, saying that there was already a bride. Her father came and began to threaten the security officer, but that only made his job easier. The friend came up and insulted her sister. Aggie's mother joined, and the fight spread, with guests joining the debate. Robert was finally called out and pretended to be confused, denied ever agreeing to any such thing, and berated them for trying to ruin his wedding. He didn't say that he had never talked to Aggie about the plan. He gaslighted them, gate-kept the truth, and girl-bossed the situation. He walked away, leaving them surrounded by angry family and guests. The ceremony went off without a hitch. When she looked at Robert, Aggie could feel her heart swell. The day was about her and her husband. Her family had tried to ruin her happiness, yet they had failed. Her parents never returned to the reception, and many guests left to investigate the drama. Robert disappeared for a moment, his face thunderous, but then returned, hiding his smile. He whispered to Aggie that he would tell her everything later. Later, they learned the full story from various guests, including the security guard, who they rewarded handsomely for a job well done. Beatrice had indeed arrived in a wedding dress and tried to get in. The father had threatened the security, but the friend came to make a scene, and the mother joined in. Soon, all their family was berating them. Eventually, they had no choice but to leave, Beatrice being dragged off by her father, still screaming. That night, Aggie and Robert finally had a moment to themselves. They laughed, cried, and they held each other close. They had finally turned a page in their lives. Her husband had told her, after the drama had died down, that he had been more excited about tricking them than the actual wedding. He had not known it was possible to watch someone be so thrilled about that. But he had witnessed it all. Even as they settled into their hotel for the night, Aggie knew that this was far from the end of the story. Her family would never give up trying to contact her, and they would never let it go. However, with Robert by her side, Aggie was ready for anything. Aggie, secure in her love with Robert, found a peace she had never known. Their honeymoon to Italy was everything that she had ever wanted, like food, art, history, and romance. Upon returning home, Aggie received countless calls from her family. Aggie, at her husband's insistence, refused to answer, ensuring that everything was documented. Beatrice finally messaged her, accusing her of ruining her life and calling Robert a two-faced snake. She also suggested Robert was having an affair with her. He found the messages hilarious and sent them to the family group text, along with the calls and messages she and her parents sent him, begging her to call them. Robert also threatened to sue for defamation. Her family members were appalled. It worked. They finally left Aggie and Robert alone. Aggie still wondered why her parents had treated her so poorly. She had theories, such as being an accident and an unwanted burden, but in the end, she just had to accept that she would never know the answer. Robert had his own theory that Beatrice had thrown a fit about Aggie getting married first. He thought that the parents had made the outlandish request thinking that they would be refused, then get out of paying for the wedding and make Beatrice feel good. When they had agreed, they had been trapped. Aggie finally felt free. She and Robert had a loving, fun, and supportive life together. Even though her family would never change, Aggie had finally taken control of her own life, surrounded by a loving husband and family that actually cared about her. Thomas casually said he was able to move on, forgetting the transgression, while completely ignoring his wife's feelings. That was something Aggie found difficult to comprehend. Agnes' life, though no longer in the shadow of Magnolia House, was not without its challenges. She continued to live in Willow Creek, and her marriage to Robert was a warm, comforting presence in her days. However, in her quiet moments, she thought of her friend, Eleanor, and her pain. Eleanor had been Aggie's good friend since their college days. She was a beautiful and vibrant woman and had gone through an even more heart-wrenching life event. After years of infertility treatments, Eleanor finally became pregnant, which was a miracle she and her husband, Thomas, had been hoping for. When she was barely halfway through her pregnancy, Thomas confessed to having an affair and getting the other woman pregnant. It was like a betrayal from one of the people Eleanor had thought she could trust most. Thomas casually said he was able to move on, forgetting the transgression, while completely ignoring his wife's feelings. That was something Aggie found difficult to comprehend. She knew Eleanor would need time to heal from such a painful experience. Like Aggie, Eleanor had a sister she could count on. Her sister convinced Eleanor to stay in their home, not to let her husband chase her away from her own life. Eleanor finally learned that the affair partner, upon reflection, had decided to terminate her pregnancy. Eleanor and her husband were in therapy now, both separately and together, but there were still so many questions and so many unknowns that she was having to confront. Eleanor confided in Aggie that she was starting to heal, but she was finding it hard to believe that her husband had betrayed her in such a horrible manner. One of the things that was plaguing her was that she had to wonder if her husband had been having affairs this whole time. That he had been tricking her since the beginning of their relationship. Then it came out, Thomas had had another affair. It wasn't long before they had to acknowledge that they were too broken to continue as a couple. It didn't help that Thomas had gone to the hospital to see their child when Eleanor had gone into preterm labor. Instead of being a source of support, he was nasty and uncooperative. He never visited Eleanor after that. Aggie tried to comfort her friend, but there was nothing she could say that would truly help. Aggie could only be there for her. All she could hope was that Eleanor would find happiness one day. Aggie's thoughts turned back to her sister, Beatrice. A few years after her wedding, Aggie received a text from Beatrice. She had asked if they could talk. She knew that Beatrice had always tried to be better, to try to one-up her sister, even as children. But now, Aggie was determined to protect herself. Aggie remembered the time that she went to her wedding. Beatrice had arrived late, had a mental breakdown, and had sent hateful and toxic texts. And now, Beatrice wanted to talk. Aggie decided, for once, that she would not be drawn back into the drama. She sent a text, saying, "I am not going to beg my blood sister to talk to me. For the time being, it would be best for us not to have a relationship. If that ever changes, I will let you know. Please respect my boundaries." Before Aggie could send it, Beatrice blocked her. Aggie was relieved and blocked her back. She would no longer be drawn into her sister's toxic world. Aggie began reflecting on her life. She had found love, happiness, and peace. She had learned that family doesn't have to be blood. And she had learned to trust herself and the people who loved her. It was then that she started thinking about her niece, Carol, a friend's daughter. Aggie had watched Carol and her friend, Diana, grow up. Their families were close and supportive. One day, Aggie learned that Carol and Diana had been in love for years and were now dating. But their families were refusing to let them be together. It seemed to be the usual story of families not liking that their children were dating. However, Aggie found out the truth. Both sets of parents were having a relationship with each other. Carol and Diana, like Aggie, were forced to confront their families that had a double standard. They tried to make peace with their families, but they had simply refused. The girls moved to Carol's sister's apartment. Soon, they began college. They continued to date, no matter what their parents thought. They went on dates, they had their school dances, and then finally, their college graduation. Aggie learned that Carol and Diana's extended families didn't seem to mind their relationship. They even seemed happy that they had finally found their person. The parents gave them tickets to their favorite band. They were finally starting to accept their relationship. Carol and Diana had not allowed the drama to get to them. They had stuck to their beliefs, and they had succeeded. Aggie smiled. She knew that life was never perfect. Yet, if you had hope, love, and friends, everything would work out. She picked up the phone, ready to call Robert, so that they could spend their evening laughing and enjoying their life.